Hey everyone, I finished this part 2 of my Week in the Life 2022 album a couple of weeks ago, but I'm just feeling well enough to start doing my voiceover. So without further ado, let's get started with this flip up page. I'm first going to share the digital part of my process on the computer, and this first part is how to use these digital templates from Ali Edwards without having to use Photoshop. So the way that I like to use them is I use cloudconvert.com to convert them to PNG files so that I can use them without Photoshop because I don't usually use Photoshop for my projects. Here I'm using the Week in the Life 2022 digital 6x8 layered templates and overlays. This is volume 9 that just released this year, and I'm looking to convert the one with the 4 squares at the top into a PNG so that I can use that as a cut file in my Brother Scan and Cut software. Now, unfortunately, when I go into the folder to pick which file to convert, there's no way to preview which one I actually need, and they're not labeled really specifically, but I have done this in advance, and I know that the one that I need is the first one actually, which is, it's labeled A Edwards _ WITL 6x8 volume 9 2002 _1. So you'll see that I have converted this image into a PNG file. And now I can just download it and import that into my Brother Scan and Cut software. And that will allow me to create a cut file for all of these kind of rounded, cornered, messy square shapes on my page. So here I'm in my Brother Canvas workspace, and I'm going to select this function that says image tracing, and then select the choose an image file to be traced as an image from my computer. And I'm going to select that PNG file that I just converted. And this will allow me to trace the outer edges of each of those fields that I have on my workspace. So I'm going to delete all of the rectangles that I have for the text boxes below because I only want to be able to cut out those windows that are kind of like the wonky square shapes. And because I want the 4 boxes to kind of fill up my 6x8 area, I'm actually going to move these around and start enlarging them so that they're approximately 2.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches tall. And I'm just going to play around a bit with that now. I found that the easiest way to do this is to drag the wonky square, or in this case a rectangle, all the way to the top left corner, and then that way you can use the square grid lines to kind of count like 2.5 squares to the right and then 3.5 squares down, and then that gives you kind of the approximate size that it should be. And then from there I'm just resizing all of them to about the same size as well. You'll also notice that I've drawn a rectangle around my 4 boxes that's about 6.5 inches wide by 9 inches tall, and this is ultimately going to be the same size. It's going to cut out the flip-up page for me out of a piece of 8.5 by 11 piece of white cardstock, and I do want to make sure that I shift my 4 boxes down a bit so that I have about an inch of space at the top so that I can create a hinge to form a flip up. So once that's done, I can select all of these individual cut files and group them all together, and then export this to my cutting machine so that I can cut this out 7 times, one for each day of the week. Before we get to the assembly part, I'm just going to show you briefly how I recolor my images to match the rainbow that I've set in terms of Monday through to Sunday. And on the left here, you'll see that I have all of my pleather pieces that I recolored and printed out. This was done prior to Week in the Life. And on the right side, I have my 4x4 journaling cards from the Week in the Life digital main kit that I want to recolor to match those colors of my rainbow. So I'm opening up one of these images in Paint. This is just a program that comes with my computer. And first off, I want to drag this out so that I can import a screenshot of what this rainbow of colors looks like. So here's a mixture of, some of these are from the original leather pieces that came in the kit, and some of them are the ones that I recolored. I just saved them all in the same folder so that it's easier to find, but I am going to take a screenshot of this screen, and then in that dragged out space on the right side of that journaling card on my paint program, I'm going to paste in this screenshot so that I can use the eyedropper tool to directly pick the colors from the rainbow that I had created earlier. And then that way, I'm not wasting time trying to figure out what colors I have to use to recolor these images. So you'll just see me drag the screenshot off to the right side here and kind of shrink it down. It does distort the screenshot a bit, but that doesn't really matter. All I'm looking for is what colors I need to use. And from there, I can just go into the eyedropper tool and select the color that I want my Monday text to be. In this case, I do want it to be that dark pink. And then I can click on the fill tool and that will fill in the entire Monday text there. From there, I want to get rid of this facts and feelings text, as well as the divider line between them. And you can use an eraser tool to do that on this program. There is an easier way that I'll show as well later on, but here's the eraser way. So you just select the eraser tool and you can zoom in and remove all of the extra parts that you don't need. And I'm just doing this just because with my journaling, I'm going to be journaling about 4 different prompts for each day. And I'm not necessarily journaling about facts and feelings separately. I'm just going to do one text box and have them numbered from 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, depending on how many pictures I have per day. After I'm done erasing the parts that I don't need, I'm going to minimize my screen so that I can see that full journaling card page, and I'm going to change the size of this so that it's 4 inches wide by 8 inches tall. Now, if you remember when you imported this into the paint program, the pixels were 1200 by 1200 to give a 4x4 card. So in order for it to be 4x8, I need to kind of drag in the right side so that it's 1200 again, and then the height will be twice that to make 8 inches tall, so that will be 2400. And then I'm going to save this. You want to make sure you hit save as, because if you hit save instead, then it will overwrite the original file. And I do want the original file to still be there just in case I need to change the color to something else, or in case I want to use that 4x4 card as is at some later point in time. Now, this technique works really great when the color that you're trying to turn it into is similar to the starting color. So I had a light pink and I wanted to change it to a dark pink. But what happens if you have a dark pink thing and you want to make it green? So in this case, you'll see that when I go in to fill in the color, there's a faint outline of pink still remaining, and that is really hard to get rid of just by using the fill tool. So I'm going to show you a workaround around that as well. And that involves using Microsoft Word to turn your image into a lighter grayscale before you go in and fill in your image color. So I'm just dragging my image here onto Microsoft Word, and then I'm going into the picture format menu and then going into format picture. And from there, I can go into that last selection there with the mountain and turn this into a grayscale image by clicking on the picture color menu and then going to the color saturation presets. And you'll see that the grayscale is the very left choice there. And then you can go under picture transparency and turn this image kind of more transparent so that it's a lighter gray instead of a very dark gray. And the lighter your image is, the less of that shadowing effect you're going to get. But I am going to keep it at about 50% transparency for now, just so that it's easier for you guys to see. And from there, you can right-click on that picture and click Save as Picture. And then this will save your image as a separate PNG file that you can then import into Paint and then do that same fill function. And you can see when I go to fill this in that there is still a slight shadow around my image, but it's nowhere near as obvious as a pink outline around some green text. One thing that you might notice is that when you're changing the transparency of your journaling card, it will lighten up the rest of that journaling card as well, including that dotted line and the facts and feelings text. So you can see that here it's a bit more of a gray instead of a true black. But I'm actually just going to get rid of these and get rid of that whole dotted line as well. And here's where I show that easier way of erasing all of this extra stuff that you don't need. And that's just by using the cropping tool on that top menu and just selecting the areas that you don't need. It is hard to get into those areas that are really close to the word art, especially when the word art is a bit curved, like in that S of the Thursday. And that's where I use my eraser tool to just erase some of those smaller areas that I can't quite get with the larger cropping tool. And you'll see that for now, I've left that horizontal line going across the bottom of that word art intact for now. But I am going to go back in later on and remove all of those lines just because I didn't think that my journaling cards needed that. So I'm just going to finish color editing all 7 of my days of the week 4x4 journaling cards, and then add some journaling onto the bottom with each of my prompts, and then print these out. And now I'm getting on to the part where I have my page assembly. So the formula for each day is going to be the same. I have a full page outside the page protector photo. So that is approximately 7 inches wide by 8¼ inches tall. And then on the back of that, I'm going to have this flip up page with the cut file that I created with the 4 wonky rectangles. And that is going to flip up and be backed by some vellum. And I'm going to include 4 photos that I have for each of the prompts that I chose with these plastic words. So for example, for Monday, I have the word loving as my prompt. And then the next page that's going to go in there is an insert with the 4x8 journaling cards that I just created on Paint and Microsoft Word. And that's going to be backed by a piece of colored cardstock that I chose specifically to match each day of the week. And that's going to be cut at 4¾ inches wide by 8¼ inches tall. So it is going to be an undercut page. And that's going to finish up the formula for this part 2 section that I have going on here. So for my assembly, I'm actually going to start by assembling this flip-up page, and I'm starting with a piece of white cardstock that measures 7 inches wide by 8¼ inches tall, and that's going to go on the back of my full page photo. And what I've done is I've actually cut out an extra one of these wonky square templates so that I can use that to trace on that piece of white cardstock approximately where the photos need to land so that I can have the photos inside all of these windows. And I'm just doing that in pencil. Everything is going to be covered up by the photos, which I've printed out at 2¾ inches wide by 3¾ inches tall. So just slightly larger than the windows that I cut out using the cut file. And once I have those 4 rectangles traced onto my piece of white cardstock, I can then use that to arrange my photos on top of the white cardstock to make sure that they're going to fall underneath those frames that I've created with the cut file, and I'm just using my Tombow Mono permanent adhesive to adhere those all down into place. And after I finished doing that, I scored the top of my cut file piece at 1/2 inch away from the top. So I did cut this down to about 8½ inches instead of the original 9 inches tall, so that I do have 1/2 inch of a hinge space to attach that to the back of this page. And I just used some 3/8 inch score tape to adhere that to the back of my flip up page. Before I did that, I did want there to be a piece of vellum in between my cut file windows and the photos underneath, just because I am going to be stitching the plastic word phrase onto my window page, and I wanted there to be a bit more contrast between the plastic transparency and my photos. And so I thought that if I just had the photos without the vellum overlay underneath, I wouldn't be able to see that word piece very well because it is transparent. And so that's why I cut a piece of vellum down just a bit smaller than the window page. So I have this cut at 6¼ inches wide by 8 inches tall. And I'm just going to adhere that to the back of my cut file page in 3 spots. So I have just applied a bit of Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape runner at the very middle of the cut file page, as well as at the very top near the center and the very bottom near the center to adhere that vellum page down. And once I have my vellum piece adhered onto the back of that window page, I'm actually not going to adhere that onto the back of my flip-up page yet, just because I am going to run that through my sewing machine to stitch that plastic word piece on the front of my flip-up page. And you'll see that later on as well. Instead, I'm going to move on to the next piece, which is that undercut insert with the colored cardstock, and I love how this pop of color just adds so much more brightness to the album in the midst of all this white that I have going on with my flip up page. And I did make sure to adhere that 4x8 journaling card to the right side of that 5x8¼ inch piece of colored cardstock, just because I do have to punch holes in that left side of that page. And the back of this piece of colored cardstock is going to hold the journaling card for my part 3 of my album, which I haven't started working on yet. For some of the days of the week, I only had 3 things that I wanted to document for the plastic word phrase prompt. And so I just included a digital form of one of the 3x4 pocket cards that came in the main kit and printed that out on glossy photo paper so that it would match the rest of my photos. And so for those ones, I only journaled about 3 things that were in my photos. And for my journaling, I decided to keep all of my journaling style consistent by numbering either 1 through 3 or 1 through 4, and then in bold typing out the prompt. So for Monday, it was loving, followed by a bit of journaling about what was in the photo related to the prompt that I had picked for each day. So once I have all of these pieces assembled, I just took all of my pieces off screen to do some stitching on my sewing machine. I'm just not quite confident in my sewing skills to show that on screen yet. But what I did was I adhered the plastic word phrase onto the cut file page just using a very small piece of 1/8 inch score tape, and I put that on the back of where the colored area was so that it's less likely that you can see through to show the adhesive on the back. And I just ran a row of stitching just in white thread horizontally down the middle of the cut file page and through the middle of that word piece on each of those pages. So once I finished with all the machine sewing, I turned the camera back on and you'll see me do the final steps in preparing all of my pages here. So I have that die cut page with the vellum on the back and the plastic word phrase stitched onto the front. And I'm using the 1/2 inch hinge to adhere that onto the back of that piece of white cardstock with the 4 photos on it, making sure to align the edges on the left side because I do want to leave a bit of space on the right side to hole punch that base page with the 4 photos on it. And after that, I'm just using my Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape runner to adhere my large photo onto the front side of that flip up page. And just making sure everything is nice and lined up before I put it into my hole puncher to punch the holes on the side. After this video, in some of the still photos and in my flip through, you'll notice that on the fronts of all of my faux page photos, I have this circle fabric piece that I created. And for that, I used the Week in the Life 2022 digital circle days of the week 4x6 stamp set. And what I did was I used that solid circle stamp to fill in a 1 3/4 inch circle with the colors that I've been using for each day of the week. So all of the colors of my Week in the Life rainbow. And on top of that, I inserted that text circle that says documenting today all around the circle. And I did that in white on top of that 1 3/4 inch circle. And then in the middle, I stamped in white the days of the week for each day of the week. And then I printed that out on some fabric paper, and the EK Success circle punches that I usually use aren't strong enough to punch through the fabric paper that I use. So I did have to use my circle dies from Spellbinders to punch those out through my die cutting machine. And then I just adhered those down onto the center of my photo wherever it made sense with some negative space, just with some Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape printer. Now, this printable fabric has a gessoed side, which is kind of like a brighter white color, and then a non-gessoed side that is kind of like a more natural linen. And I decided to print on the natural linen side just to give it a bit more of an interesting texture on my page. But I did notice that the ink kind of rubbed off a bit when I was touching it. So you do want to make sure that if you are using the non-gessoed side, to give it a bit more time to dry before you play around with it. And here's the final flip through of the pages that I completed today. Of course, I do have one more prompt for every day of the week, which is the fabric pieces that came in the Week in the Life mini kit that I still have yet to use, and that will be in part 3 of my Week in the Life album. I was hoping to have my Week in the Life album completed by the end of August, but then I got COVID and I was really short in energy, and so I think now I will try to aim to have it done before December daily, but there's no guarantees with that, unfortunately, but I will keep you guys posted whenever I do get around to finishing this album. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. If you liked this video, then make sure to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe for future crafty videos. Thanks so much for watching.